HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Good Night, Mr. Wodehouse, a novel by Faith Sullivan, read by Callie Beaulieu. She read Dickens in the spirit in which she would have eloped with him. Eudora Welty. Prologue. In 1944, at age 68, Nell Stillman wrote her obituary, this despite perfectly good health. Years later, the new owner of the Standard Ledger published the piece in full. In our town, the custom is that an obituary should be kind. A kind word at the end is a little reward for dying. Never mind that no one spoke well of you before death, nor will hence. Death is a serious business. The undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, and this one time you are owed. But frankly, Helen Ryan Stillman was no better than she should be, so, contrary to custom, I will not reward her for dying. On October 12, 1876, Helen, Nell as she was called, was born in Woodridge, Wisconsin, to shanty Irish immigrants, affectionate and gentle Annie and Donald Ryan, late of Tipperary. Donald being an untutored farmer on unimproved land, the family struggled with poverty. After high school, Nell worked her way through Milwaukee State Normal School, obtaining teacher certification in 1896. In January of 1897, she married Herbert Bartholomew Stillman of Rhinelander, Wisconsin. They moved to Harvester, settling in an apartment above Robel's Meat Market, where Nell would reside until her death. On December 18, 1898, she gave birth to Hillyard Donald Stillman, a soul without stain. He now dwells in Elysian Fields, where, should it mean swimming the length of the River Styx, Nell plans to join him. In 1909, Nell discovered P.G. Wodehouse, who became her treasured companion and savior. She recommends his books to all who know distress, and of course, to all who don't. But further, she simply commends reading Dickens, Austen, Steinbeck, or whom you will. In books are found solace, companionship, entertainment, and enlightenment, the stuff of our salvation. Mrs. Stillman taught third grade for 37 years in the Harvester Public School. Preceded in death by both husband and son, Nell Stillman knew the kindness of dear friends and eventually the love of a good man. For days, folks in Harvester spoke of little but Nell's obituary. Bonita Hanson had never heard of the Elysian Fields nor of the River Styx. Of course, even today, mass communication notwithstanding, there are many things of which people in Harvester have never heard. Irma Blessing felt that the obituary was eccentric, a sign of mental instability. I'd blame it on the bomb. But to Harvey Munson it was more like egomania. Imagine thinking you were smarter than Mr. Estes at the Standard Ledger, writing your own obituary. Eventually, the love of a good man. What's that supposed to mean? Milkman Casey Birnbaum wondered. Out in Elysian Fields, Nell agreed. Composing her own obituary was perhaps eccentric and egotistical. But as for the Elysian Fields, look it up. Chapter 1. 6:45 a.m., July 17th, 1900. Wiping egg from his plate with a scrap of toast, Bert cast Nell a dubious smile. I'm not sure a good Catholic woman ought to enjoy the bedroom. He reached to pinch her breast, like you did last night. Nell winced and pulled away. In bed he often treated her like a whore, but if she responded like one, he'd press, "Who taught you that?" though she'd never been with a man before their marriage. Pushing back from the table, Bert rose to fetch his cap from a hook by the door. Turning, he grabbed Nell's waist, squeezing it in his sinewy arm, even as she stiffened. "Now, girl," he said, affecting a brogue, No wild carrying on because you miss me. A man's got to put food on the table and clothes on his lad." He saluted the 18-month-old peeking out from behind his mother, clutching her skirt in his two plump hands. Bert was a physical man, one who had to work off his impulses, and he looked forward to the lifting and hauling and driving of horses that made up his days at Kolchak's dray and livery. Kolchak was a fair and canny boss, and he had plans for Bert. Horseless vehicles, that was where the future was, Kolchak had told him, and Bert knew that the man was right. Back in the Wisconsin logging camps, Bert had yearned for a job like this, something with a future, a town life, a pretty wife if he was lucky. Well, he'd been lucky, but by God, she'd been lucky too, and she'd better be careful they didn't get another kid. "I'll try to behave," Nell told her husband, pulling back and laughing rather too lightly. "And next time, I'd appreciate meat with my eggs and potatoes. A working man needs meat." Bert released her and swung away, out the screen door and down the outside stairs, admonishing, "Meat, Helen, old girl." She frowned. He would insist upon calling her Helen, though no one else did. "Nell sounds like a barkeep's daughter," he'd assured her often enough. And meat, Helen, old girl. Where was she supposed to find the money for that? Nell lifted the baby into her arms, watching her husband cross 2nd Avenue, whistling, headed for work. The heat of the day was already cruel. From beneath Bert's heavy boots, a close-woven cloud of dust rose up, enshrouding him. Summer heat pays no mind to death. The temperature was 90 the morning following Bert's death. Dressed, Nell sat in the wicker rocker, nursing the baby. It was important to feign calm, not to upset the child. Even so, she must make her way through a tangle of questions, the first being, where could she turn? Panic swept through her with a chill, and she shuddered despite herself. Beneath her arms, her dress was wet with cold sweat. At the screen door, a hard, familiar knock. "Come in." Nell plucked a piece of flannel from her lap, placing it over her breast and the baby's head. Trailed by her husband Bernard, Bert's Aunt Martha let herself in, wheezing, "Poor Herbert, only 35 years old, just 35." Dabbing at her wet hairline with a handkerchief and laying a tapestry reticule on the table by the daybed, she turned. "The heat and the dust. I'm not well. The drive to town has done me in." Nell noticed Martha's gaze falling upon the wicker rocker, which the older couple had given Bert and Nell as a wedding gift. Martha's eyes narrowed acquisitively. Then her finer nature appeared to prevail, and she sank down onto a straight chair, the dry wood crepitating beneath her. "What will you do now?" Nell could only shake her head. Tucking the handkerchief inside the cuff of her dress, Martha considered her husband, perched with hat in hand at the edge of the daybed, as if all of life were, for him, quite tentative, including this visit. "Bernard, where's the ground cherry jam and the preserved chicken? Left them in the buggy, did you?" Shoulders sloped in perpetual resignation, Bernard rose, shambling down the street to fetch the jam and chicken. "Thought you'd be able to use them," Martha told Nell. "I don't imagine you and Herbert had much put aside for something like this." For something like death? No. Bert's salary at Kolchak's had barely covered their modest expenses. There was nothing put by. Though Nell had a teaching certificate, the Harvester School Board did not hire married women, especially not of childbearing age. Another cold panic washed through her. No money, no work. She couldn't return to Wisconsin. Her father was dead, her mother living with Nell's sister Nora, who already had enough on her plate thanks to her shandy husband Patty, 2 young sons, and an acreage of no consequence. "I'm not clear about something," Martha pressed, adjusting her glasses. Why was Herbert lifting a heavy trunk by himself on a blistering day? Her tone implied that a fine Italian hand, possibly Nell's, must be somewhere involved. No one else was at the livery. Ted Schutte had gone home for lunch, and the trunk needed delivering. Eudora Barnstable had already sent a boy to see about the delay. Martha suspired audibly, pursed her lips, and threw her head back. "That one," she said, referring to Mrs. Barnstable. "Imagine forcing a lone man to load a heavy trunk on a 90-degree day." She didn't know he was alone. "Doesn't matter. That's her way." Martha whipped the handkerchief from her cuff, mopping her throat. Nell was sorry she'd mentioned Eudora Barnstable. "May I get you a glass of cold tea? There's a pitcher in the icebox, or I can fetch water from the pump out back." Hoping Martha would refuse, Nell didn't rise. "Here's the jam and canned chicken," Bernard said, appearing in the doorway. "For crying out loud," Martha told him, "shut the screen before you let in every fly in town." No refusal coming from Martha, Nell rose, the baby still in her arms. "I was about to pour cold tea for Martha," Nell told Bernard. "You'll have a glass, won't you? And cookies. Only store-bought, I'm afraid. Too hot to fire up the cook stove." Moments later, one-handed, Nell set the tray on the table beside the daybed, handed Martha and Bernard tea, and passed around napkins and a plate of ginger cookies. Martha snapped open the coarse linen napkin as if it might conceal a viper, then tucked the fabric into her ample bosom. "Now, back to Herbert," she began. "Dr. Gray said he died instantly. He showed every sign of a burst artery." Martha blew crumbs from her shelf. "Doctors don't know everything." "Hillyard needs changing," Nell told her. When she'd returned with the freshly diapered child, she asked, "Would you like to hold him? He's a very good baby." Nell patted the satiny skin of Hilly's plump thigh and looked from Martha to Bernard. "We have to be going," Martha said, rising and tugging at her overburdened corset. "When do you need us for the funeral?" She might have been inquiring the schedule of the westbound train. "At 10. The women's sodality is serving lunch in the church basement afterwards. I hope you can stay. Depends on my dropsy. I haven't been well." "Of course." Nell moved with her in-laws toward the door. "We don't want you overdoing." She kissed the top of the baby's head and smiled at Martha, now on the outside landing. "We'd like to be more help," Martha said, one hand grasping the rail, the other clasping the tapestry reticule to her breast. "But you understand, we're still paying for our new buggy." The baby blew little bubbles and waved as the aunt and uncle descended the wooden stairs. Chapter 2. "And now?" Nell shifted the baby and stared at the altar, at the linens, beautiful, immaculate, at the gold cup and paten. In this little church, in this small village, a gold cup and paten. Who had paid for those? She was in debt for the coffin, the undertaker. Did Kolchak owe Bert wages? She tried to recall. For God's sake, Nell, stop it. Nothing was owing. Her chest constricted. "My God, my God, my God," the baby whimpered. She was holding him too tightly. The next day dawned fiery, not a day of kindly portent. Lethargic with the heat and despair, Nell lay in bed, absently running a hand along her left arm, testing the tender spot above the elbow where a bruise had not yet healed. Another on her right hip was deeper, more painful. Bert. Her mind was an awful confusion this morning, so much to consider. Yet it would wander back where it never should. Bert's fist. Last winter. Afterward, snow and blood. Then, the outhouse. She flung the damp sheet away with a suppressed cry, hurling herself from the bed. Trembling, she leaned heavily against the bureau. "What now, Bert? I've got 65 cents in a jar in the kitchen." Dressed, she roamed the 4 sparsely furnished rooms. What furnishings they had, apart from the wicker rocker, Bert had haggled off a foreclosed couple moving back east. Would she soon be carrying this small collection down to the street to sell? A finger, absently dragged across the top of a bureau and the back of a chair, came away soiled. Though Nell cleaned daily with a damp cloth, in the warm months dust collected on every surface, drifting up from passing wagons and buggies on the unpaved street below. She had fed and bathed the baby and set him on the floor with wooden blocks and a battered pie tin when she heard steps on the outside stairs. Crossing to the open door, she was perplexed to see the Lundins, Lawrence and Juliet. Nell knew the two only by sight. They were Methodist, not Catholic. Lawrence owned a dry goods store, a bank, and a brand-new lumber yard. He sat on the school board, and his son, George, had graduated from Harvard this past spring. Did Herbert owe them money? "May we come in?" Juliet Lundin asked as Nell opened the screen door. "We won't stay but a minute, but we wanted to pay a call. Please. The apartment is very warm, but there's cool tea." Ignoring the offer, Mr. Lundin removed his Panama hat and followed his wife into the stifling living room. He had the rosy, healthy complexion common to Scandinavian faces, and his eyes were the unclouded blue of bachelor's buttons. "We'll only be a minute," Mrs. Lundin repeated. "Please, have a seat, at least. It's kind of you to call." Diminutive Juliet Lundin, with her prematurely graying auburn hair and small, eloquent hands, sat on a straight chair, the soles of her black calfskin boots barely brushing the floor. Though her frame was delicate, Nell suspected that the woman was not in the least fragile. Bent a little forward, as if by urgency, Juliet said, "We were saddened to hear of Herbert's death, and shocked. My goodness, he was so young. And the two of you with a darling baby." As though he understood, Hilly proffered Mrs. Lundin a wooden block. She bent and kissed his hand. Lawrence, now settled into the rocker, cleared his throat. "We want to be useful, Mrs. Stillman," he said, his tone both avuncular and businesslike. "May I call you Nell?" Nell was amazed that these people knew her name and Bert's, and that here they were wanting to be useful. "Lawrence is the president of the school board," Mrs. Lundin pointed out, "and we've been told that you have a teaching certificate. That was far-sighted of you. Many women would not be prepared to provide for a child." "My God, it's true," thought Nell. "I'm no longer a married woman." Looking up from the pale Panama held in his hands, Lawrence Lundin again cleared his throat. "We're losing our third-grade teacher this fall, and the board was wondering if you might consider the post," Juliet Lundin pursued. "They'd rather not go afield if someone local is available, someone qualified, of course." Nell reached for the arm of the daybed, lowering herself onto it. "To substitute, you mean, until you find someone?" No, we're offering you a year's contract," Lawrence Lundin said. Nell's eyes filled. "Of course you'll need time to think about it," Mrs. Lundin added. Nell willed back her tears. "I don't need time. I need work." She withdrew a handkerchief from the pocket of her apron and dabbed at her nose. "I'm overcome," she said. "Don't be," Lundin told her, rising. "We need a teacher, and you are one." His hand went to an inside pocket. "You may need a bit of cash to tide you over until September," he said, handing her an envelope. "With an infant, there's always something, isn't there?" He smiled and donned the Panama. "Good day, then." Weak from the Lundins' improbable kindness, Nell clasped the envelope to her middle and slumped against the door jamb. As the Lundins rounded the corner of the street, she wandered back toward the kitchen. Had she owned whiskey, she'd have enjoyed a tot. As it was, she poured cool tea and sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the unopened envelope. In the living room, Hilly crawled to the wooden chair and pulled himself to his feet. Toddling into the kitchen, he grabbed his mother's apron and looked up at her in the demanding way that infants do. Still moving in a daze, Nell took him on her lap. At length, she ran a fingernail under the envelope flap and extracted 5 $20 bills and a slip of fine vellum on which Juliet Lundeen had written, "Nell, a small recognition of your loss. Use as needed. J.L." $100. As much as Bert had made in 3 months at the dray and livery. Then she wept loudly, and the child bawled to see her tears. Chapter 3. "Aunt Martha," Nell called the next day as Bernard helped his wife down from their new buggy. "Glad I caught you." What fresh incommodity was this? Martha appeared to wonder, fanning herself with a handkerchief. "I'm in an awful hurry," she said. "I won't keep you. I know the heat is bothering you." Nell shifted Hilly on her hip. "I'm going to be teaching this fall, and I'll need someone to look after Hillyard. I hoped you might know of a girl." "Teaching? Where?" "The school board has offered me a contract for 3rd grade." Nell brushed Hilly's hair off his damp brow. "It's a godsend. I didn't know which way to turn." "But you've only just begun your morning. What will people think if you rush out to work?" "I can't care. Do you know of a girl?" "Well," Martha began, "Herbert's cousin Roland has a daughter, Elvira. Left school after 8th grade to help at home, but her younger sister's 12 now and old enough to take hold, so Elvira will be looking for a place. I'll talk to the mother." "You're so kind," Nell said, holding Hilly close. "So kind." When the baby was down for the night, Nell stood in the semi-dark at the west-facing window of his bedroom. Below, voices rang out, mostly farm families starting late for home, wagons creaking, horses nickering, the dusk of 9 o'clock lighting their way to country roads. One by one, they emptied Main Street. On this, her 3rd night of widowhood, Nell listened to men going in and out through the propped open door of Reagan's Saloon and Billiards, a strident piano accompanying them. And from a 2-block distance came the hushed tinkling of the piano at the Harvester Arms Hotel, these reaching her like memories of country dances. She had let her hair down and braided it into a single plait. Now she thrust it over her shoulder. Inside her cotton nightdress, perspiration trickled down the flume of her spine, and she reached back to wick it with the gown. Soundlessly, she fetched 2 kitchen chairs and placed them against the low bedside to prevent Hilly from rolling out. Despite the heat, he slept as if drugged. She wished that she could take him in her arms, absorbing his untroubled serenity like a sleeping powder. Back at the open window, she fell to her knees weeping. But weeping for what? At length, a wisp of night breeze, what her mother called a fairy kiss, lifted the damp strands of hair clinging to Nell's nape and temples. She breathed deeply and rose, staring down at Hilly's blurred form against the sheet. Life's purpose grew as clear then as a drop of pure water. This child must grow up gentle and happy, of course, and I must see to it. "I'm Elvira," the girl at the door spoke softly, shifting an ancient carpet bag from one hand to the other. Nell had expected a girl with thick ankles and thicker wits, but the young woman on the landing was tiny and well-formed, with intelligent dark eyes set in a perfect oval of pale skin. "Come in, come in." Nell held the door. "You'll share Hilly's room," she said, leading the way. Nell had purchased a twin bed and bureau from the newly opened Bender's second hand. A new kerosene lamp stood on the bureau. Since the baby was asleep, Nell whispered, "This will be your bed, and this," she pointed, "is your bureau. Mrs. Rabel gave me lavender from her garden to scent the drawers. I hope you like lavender." The girl nodded a blank face. "The Rabels are good to us. To me. I still forget that Herbert's gone." Odd the way she'd begun thinking of him as Herbert, not Bert, as if in death she'd put him at a little distance, as if he were both strange to her now and, at the same time, finally coming clear. "Well, I'll let you put your things away. Would you like a glass of cool tea when you're ready?" Turning back, Nell said, "There's a commode in the bathroom. I'm afraid emptying the pot will be your job." Again the girl nodded. Shy or anxious, Nell thought, setting out ginger cookies on a plate and pouring tea into 2 glasses. "The baby's handsome," Elvira said, pulling out a kitchen chair from the table. Nell smiled. "Handsome. Thank you. He looks like Herbert." Did he? She was no longer quite sure. She sat down. "Think you'll like town life?" "Oh, yes," the girl said. "So many things going on." She hugged herself. "Exciting." "I forgot to ask. Are you Catholic?" "Yes, I brought my missal and rosary." "It wouldn't have mattered, but this way we can go together." Nell held the cool glass to her temple. If the heat continued, the classroom would be hot, the children restless. "Do they have parish dances here, Cousin Nell?" the girl asked. "No, but there are dances at the hotel every Saturday night. Herbert and I used to go before we had Hilly, but please, just call me Nell." The girl took a bite of cookie and chewed. Then, "Do you have to have a beau to go to the dances?" "Oh, heavens, no. All the girls go. Town girls and country girls. Are the town girls stuck up?" "Oh, I don't think so. You'll have to see for yourself." "You wouldn't mind if I went to a dance?" "Goodness, no. Maybe you'll find a beau." "How old are you?" 16. Ma says I ought to be married." "What do you say?" "I want to find out about town life first." She paused. "Maybe find a town beau." She peered up from beneath black lashes to see if Nell was shocked. "Why's that?" "Had enough of the farm." She smoothed the oilcloth covering the table. Nell noticed that the girl's hands were rough and sore. Small burns marked the wrists. Canning, probably milking and cooking for hired men. No field work, though. Elvira's face was fashionably pale. At the Saturday dances, she'd give the other girls a run for their money. When the girl picked Hilly up from his nap the next afternoon, she told Nell, "He's the best baby. Not like the ones in my family. Ugh, such fussers. Colicky, most of 'em. That'll tire you out." She rolled her eyes and held Hilly close, kissing his warm cheek. "This one's like a doll." She changed his dirty diaper, sponged his bottom, and powdered him with baking soda. They'd taken to each other, Elvira and Hilly. Both were children, really, Nell thought. For all Elvira's talk of a town beau, the girl was artless and vulnerable, and Nell soon saw that Elvira liked pretending that Hilly was her own. She play-acted the little mother, dreaming of a town husband, Nell supposed. A few days later, Elvira took Hilly for the first of many walks to the Milwaukee Depot, 3 blocks away. Having lived on a farm far from a railway, Elvira now gravitated to the depot. She timed the walks to coincide with the arrival of the 2:30 p.m. passenger train. After the first excursion, she reported that she and Hilly had seen a commercial traveler alighting with his satchel and sample case. Least, that's what Mr. Loftus, the depot agent, called him, commercial traveler. One afternoon, while Elvira and Hilly were out, Nell sat at the kitchen table drumming her fingers. A week until she must prove herself. She had a teaching certificate, yes, but almost no practical experience, just a few days substituting in a country school. What if town children were cannier than country children? What if they set out to bring her down? Such things happened. Hadn't she heard of a young woman in Minneapolis who'd hanged herself when the school board wouldn't renew her contract? She'd been unable to control her pupils, they'd said. And no other school wanted a teacher whose contract hadn't been renewed. What if, after all their kindness, Nell failed the Lundins? Chapter 4. The day before it opened, Nell walked down Main Street to the Harvester School, an impressive.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?